If you're watching this on the date of its premiere, it's August 16th, 2019, the 20th anniversary of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire's premiere in the United States on ABC. This summer, the show finally received the axe as only a shell of its former self, having gone through more changes and revamps than anybody can count. While Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, and Family Feud all pulled in ratings at or near the 6.0 mark, Millionaire remained an incredibly distant fourth, usually falling somewhere in the 1.5 to 1.8 range. At its worst, the ratings were even lower. So what went wrong? What led to the fall of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire after it rose to game show glory so rapidly? How could a show that single-handedly changed and revived the game show genre at the turn of the millennium see cancellation less than 2 decades later, while the other 3 syndicated game shows continue to thrive? Well, before we talk about Millionaire's fall, we have to explain how we got here, and that starts with the show's rise. The Millionaire franchise began on the 4th of September 1998 when it premiered in the United Kingdom on ITV. Everything about the show worked. Chris Tarrant captivated the British public with brilliant catchphrases and a simple format that made the show easy to follow. At its peak in the UK, one episode of Millionaire alone brought in over 19 million viewers, an astonishing 1/3 of the British population at the time. For comparison's sake, the Super Bowl usually garners around 110 million viewers every year, which is roughly 1/3 of the US population. In other words, a simple quiz show was essentially earning Super Bowl level ratings over in Britain. That's how massive of a success Millionaire was. With that, it should be no surprise that the show was exported all over the world, and the United States was no exception. Millionaire made its way to America 20 years ago today, on August 16, 1999. It was hosted by television legend and icon Regis Philbin on ABC. The show quickly became a resounding success and helped lift ABC out of last place in the ratings among the major networks. One celebrity special in May of 2000 that saw Rosie O'Donnell win $500,000 for charity earned over 36 million viewers. Not quite Super Bowl level ratings, but still an incredible number when you consider that putting a game show on primetime television was a laughable idea just 12 months earlier. Millionaire's ratings were unheard of for a show of its genre and led ABC to give it multiple runs every week. This was really the first mistake made by the show's producers. ABC's over-reliance on the show's success led to its audience being oversaturated and burned out. By the end of 2001, the ratings were only a fraction of what they were at the show's peak. ABC eventually canceled the primetime version, with the final episode airing June 27, 2002. Of course, this didn't completely kill the show, however. The following September, a daytime syndicated version of Millionaire premiered that at the time was virtually identical to its primetime counterpart. The only differences were pre-selected contestants due to a lack of fastest finger first, a half-hour runtime as opposed to a full hour, and a new host in Meredith Vieira. The show became relatively successful in daytime, and while the money and lifelines were tweaked slightly over the years, the show saw very little change in its first 6 seasons in syndication. In 2008, however, Millionaire adopted what became known as the clock format, tweaking the music and graphics while adding time limits to each question. While this was far from the most harmful change to the show, it still took away from the uniqueness of it. Like the game of baseball, one of the beautiful things about Millionaire is that it had no sort of time or clock aspect to it at all. Contestants were given the luxury of spending as long as they wanted on any given question. According to Philbin, one contestant once spent 52 minutes on a single question before eventually giving the wrong answer. Michael Davies' idea that the show had to move at a faster pace to somehow adapt to the new TV world was at the very least perplexing, especially considering that contestants who spent a long time studying a question could have much of that time edited out of the final product anyway. Regardless, in 2010 the clock format was dropped, but what replaced it was something far worse: the shuffle format. Beginning in Season 9, the format was overhauled to make the game less predictable. The game was split into 2 rounds rather than the classic 3, and the first round consisted of 10 questions rather than the usual 5. The difference, though, is that the difficulty and monetary value of each of the first 10 questions were both random and unknown relative to its placement on the money tree until after the contestant had seen and successfully answered it. Did you follow all of that? Here, let me make it a bit easier to understand. The very first question in round 1 could be worth as much as $25,000 and still be one of the easiest questions on the board. Does that make any sense to you? Yeah, me neither. But that wasn't even the worst change that came with the Season 9 overhaul. No, that would be a new lifeline that was introduced along with the shuffle format. Jump the question. Yep, that's right, exactly what the lifeline sounds like. If you came to a question to which you didn't know the answer, you could just jump right over it and continue playing the game. To be fair, the money you would have earned for getting that question right wouldn't have been added to your bank, but still, the whole point of lifelines is to assist the contestant in answering the question correctly, and jump the question defeated this whole purpose. Oh, and did I mention that this lifeline was available to contestants twice per game? Yep, Ask the Expert, which was basically a new version of Phone a Friend, and Double Dip, which was basically a new version of 50-50, were both dropped in favor of Jump the Question. Finally, the hot seat was removed, and the show's theme music was redone with an inferior, less dramatic tune replacing the original classic Heartbeat music. It wasn't Millionaire anymore. Take a look at Jeopardy and Family Feud from 1984 and tell me what you see compared to the two shows today. The music's the same, the set and graphics, while modernized, are very similar, and aside from some minor tweaks, the formats are virtually identical. Now compare Millionaire from the original Primetime version to Season 17 in syndication. Would you believe that this is the exact same show despite how different the two versions are? If I were a casual viewer, I'd find Millionaire virtually unrecognizable. Clearly the show needed a change, and one of the changes they tried was bringing in a new host. Millionaire must have seen the success of Family Feud, which itself had been on the brink of cancellation just a few years earlier, and how it took off when Steve Harvey took over hosting the show. I say this because Millionaire tried to replicate this success by going with a comedian in Cedric the Entertainer to replace Vieira, who stepped down after season 11. Cedric's arrival marginally helped the ratings for a bit, but the serious nature of a big money quiz show proved to not be a good fit for him, and despite having originally signed a 3-year deal, he left after just one season. Season 13 saw the arrival of Terry Crews, but again, the blend of a very energetic comedian with a more serious format didn't work, and Crews was gone after a single season as well. They did finally settle with a solid and stable host in Chris Harrison for the final 4 seasons and dumped the shuffle format with his arrival, but by then the damage was basically done and it was too late. For Chris's first season, the show was bumped to highly undesirable time slots across the country, which only further hurt the ratings. Here in the Philadelphia market, for example, Millionaire aired new episodes on 6ABC at 1:05 a.m. Yeah, a.m., after the 11 o'clock news, after Kimmel, etc. Look, I love game shows, but I'm not staying up until nearly 2 in the morning every night just to get my daily dose of trivia. Millionaire never should have chased the next Steve Harvey. If you need proof of that, look no further than Harvey himself. Yep, that's right, Steve Harvey actually guest hosted Millionaire for 1 week in the middle of Season 8 while Vieira was concurrently working on NBC's Today Show. Let's just say Harvey's performance really wasn't that great. He was basically there to promote his new book, and his attempts to invoke comedy into the show fell flat far more often than not. He was even roasted by Kenan Thompson on Saturday Night Live for his performance. Don't get me wrong, on Family Feud he's fantastic, but that's a show that emphasizes comedy as a part of its game. Millionaire doesn't, and obviously that didn't suit Harvey well. But above all, the biggest problem Millionaire faced really throughout its entire run in syndication should be obvious: the lack of a top prize winner. This was the most blatant and obvious reason for Millionaire's demise. The top prize was simply virtually unwinnable. You see, back on the Primetime show, if you were good enough to pass the initial process to make it into the fastest finger chairs and found yourself in the hot seat, as long as you had a fair amount of general knowledge, you'd have a legitimate chance of taking home a top prize. On the syndicated show, the questions at the highest levels of the money tree in particular were often so obscure that not even some of game show and trivia's finest could even come close to winning $1 million. Ken Jennings is arguably the greatest Jeopardy contestant ever. Well, maybe Brad Rutter and James Holzhauer have an argument, but the point is, he is somebody who clearly knows his stuff. The same guy who won 74 games of Jeopardy in a row couldn't make it past the $100,000 question on Millionaire when he appeared on the show in 2014. If he can't even win the $1 million, nobody can. And he's far from the only one. David Giuliano was one of the most memorable contestants from the short-lived game show Greed, which ironically many saw as Fox's answer to ABC's Millionaire success. Giuliano was a part of a team that ended up winning a $2 million prize during a Super Greed special, of which he earned an $800,000 share. He also appeared on Win Ben Stein's Money, beating Stein to win that game, and won a game of Jeopardy in 1991. He even appeared on Millionaire briefly as a phone-a-friend to his old Greed teammate Phyllis Harris in 2001, and knew the answer to the $64,000 question before Harris even read the choices aloud. When he appeared on Millionaire himself in 2011, however, he couldn't even get out of the first round, and ended up leaving with a consolation prize of only $1,000. These are just 2 examples of many. The syndicated version of Millionaire lasted for 17 seasons and produced only three $3 million winners. The first two, Kevin Smith and Nancy Christie, both won their prizes in season 1. The third was Sam Murray, and with no disrespect to Sam, his top prize win was a bit of a gimmick. In 2009, at the start of season 8, Millionaire's producers decided that it had been far too long since the top prize had been won. Ironic, considering they'd let the show go on without a millionaire for an additional 9+ years after this, isn't it? Anyway, the show adopted what they called a tournament of 10, where they took the 10 highest earning contestants from the first couple months of the season, and then invited them all back to answer a single question at $1 million difficulty. The highest seeded contestant who successfully answered his or her question would win a $1 million prize, and that winner ended up being Sam Murray, who became just the third millionaire on the syndicated version. Once the shuffle format came in, no one really came close. Josina Reeves and, of all people, Nashville's Chip Eston both saw the $1 million question, but Reeves flunked out while Eston walked away. But again, take a look at each of their questions. The only way Reeves or Eston could have won the top prize is if they were absolute experts in every sense of the word on Nostradamus and Ben Franklin respectively. Heck, the only reason Eston even saw the $1 million question is because of his expertise in Beatles trivia on the $500,000 question. How many people do you know who can name a license plate on the car seen in the Abbey Road cover? That's something so specific and obscure that it's almost unfair. Now, obviously, I'm not saying the $1 million questions in Primetime were gimmies. Well, maybe they were if your name was Dan Blonsky, but anyway, they were still nothing more than general knowledge trivia that a smart contestant had a good chance of knowing if he or she were at least generally familiar with the subject. The top prize was clearly attainable, and this was obvious since 9 different contestants became millionaires in less than 2 years. As I mentioned earlier, Millionaire made several last-ditch efforts to reignite interest in the show, but it was too late, and we got the news we all figured was coming. Once January passed without a renewal, it was clear. Millionaire's 17-year run in syndication was coming to an end. So let's revisit why this happened. Millionaire's oversaturation by ABC at the height of its popularity burned its audience out and caused viewers to lose interest. This forced a transition from primetime to daytime syndication. When the show made its transition to syndication, aside from season 1, it failed to deliver a single top prize winner, well, at least in regular season play. With interest in the show declining once again, Millionaire tried new gimmicks such as the clock format, shuffle format, and tournament of 10. When they didn't help, they went with a different personality trait and comedy when choosing each of their next 2 hosts. When that didn't work either, the show did its best to revert back to how things once were, but by then the ship had already sailed. The show limped along with Chris Harrison for 4 final seasons with no new gimmicks, but also no special events and no real attempt to escape total irrelevance. With the producers realizing that the show had faded into total irrelevance, they finally canceled it this May. And yes, things outside of Millionaire's control, such as the economy crash in 2008, certainly didn't help. Contestants became far more conservative in their gameplay after that and weren't willing to take big risks, often walking away relatively early compared to the contestants of old. That being said, the questions were still unreasonably difficult, and that created a true top prize of only about $250,000 rather than $1 million. I mean, come on, if not even Ken Jennings can be a millionaire, how can anyone else? Millionaire needs at least 2 to 3 years off the air here in the States to have a rest, but I'm not convinced the show has given its final answer just yet. If you don't believe me, take a look back across the pond with our friends in the UK. In 2014, Chris Tarrant retired from UK Millionaire, which itself had been through a handful of changes and declined massively since its peak. With that, ITV simply decided to give the show a break. 4 years later, in 2018, Millionaire returned for a 20th anniversary special with a new host in Jeremy Clarkson. While the new UK Millionaire hasn't necessarily taken off as the same runaway success, it's done more than well enough to attract viewership and got a well-deserved renewal, returning for new episodes in 2019, where we very nearly saw the show's 6th £1 million winner. The only differences between the original and the revival are 6 fastest finger first contestants rather than 10, a new lifeline in Ask the Host, bringing the lifeline total to 4, and an option that places a second safe haven in the contestant's hands wherever he or she wants it to be. These are all minor changes that have minimal impact on the gameplay. The music's the same and the set is virtually identical. It feels like Millionaire did in 1998. If the show is ever going to make a US comeback, producers need to look not only at the UK show's success, but also the success of ABC's Summer Fun and Games. Over the past few years, ABC, Millionaire's original network, has revived several classic game shows, and for the most part, they've used the exact same titles, gameplay, and music in doing so. Game shows are back on prime time, at least during the summer months, and ABC is far from the only network making them. If it's given a couple of years rest, Millionaire may very well have an opportunity to rise from the ashes on the very same network that gave it a chance 20 years ago today, but it needs to be done correctly. Regis turns 88 in less than 2 weeks and is all but retired from television, so obviously the show will have to look elsewhere to find a new host. I don't know, maybe ABC could talk their Dancing with the Stars guy Tom Bergeron into doing it. He's a solid MC and a former Millionaire guest host himself. I think he'd do a good job. But a good host is only half the battle. If Millionaire is going to return, they must go all out. I'm talking original music, original graphics, original gameplay, original set, and above all, original question difficulty. This shouldn't be that hard to do, given that ABC has done that exact thing for their revivals of game shows that originally aired on rival networks. So there you have it. How Millionaire rose to glory, fell to its death, and how I believe it can rise again. This is my call to action for ABC. Bring this show back in 2 or 3 years as a summer replacement show. Hire an experienced host who knows the format. And most importantly, make the top prize realistically winnable. It's hard to kill a good format entirely, and the original Millionaire is certainly a good format. If recreated well, it can absolutely succeed again. Thank you for watching.